Thanks for tuning in to the Football Talk Squadron. I'm Dutch, and this is this week's episode covering Week 4 of the NFL. As you can tell, Maul's not here. The reason for that is our schedules just aren't lining up this week. He's still going to be a part of this team and still be doing episodes with us, but on a week-in, week-out basis. I really didn't like the fact that we were not able to get a weekly college and NFL episode out, because honestly, once 1 week happens, you don't really talk about it anymore. It's last week's news, and there's too many good stories throughout the week that I felt like we were leaving out. So when he's in town, we'll both be here and we'll both give you an episode for the week. But in the meantime, I'm going to try to run it solo, and we'll see what happens. It's either going to look like Patrick Mahomes or it's going to look like Justin Fields. One man's trash is another man's treasure. I can't really predict how that's going to go, but we'll see, and we'll try it out. When I'm doing it solo, if I'm home, I'm going to be able to do a video, and I'll post it online. Other weeks, it may just be the audio. We'll still add the graphics for the guess the players each and every week. That way you can follow along at home, but sometimes it just may be the screen with just the audio. Ultimately, trying to get the information out the best that we can. We'll see how it goes, but this is the first week trying it, so ultimately, you guys can let me know in the comments if you don't like it or not, and we'll make changes as we see fit. But first week, doing it solo, it'd be more for you guys in terms of guess the player. So we'll start off with the past first. So if you guys following at home, you'll see the screen pop up right now. College for this player was Boston College. His first team was the Chicago Bears, then the New England Patriots, then the Buffalo Bills, the San Diego Chargers. So just to give it one more time, the Bears, the Patriots, the Bills, and the Chargers. Now, for you guys following at home, we'll give a few hints, and then I'll tell you if you want to pause the video, you can, and I'll announce who it is. The first hint, NFL draft, was 1985 in round 11. He was the 285th pick. This player's position, for your next hint, was quarterback. And then the final hint is he had a more memorable play in college in terms of a game winner in a Hail Mary than he did in the NFL. The only major moment that I can think of in the NFL was a drop kick that he did with the Patriots, which probably is your other huge hint of who this player is. If you haven't guessed it by now, go ahead and pause, but the player it's Doug Flutie. I think when I sit back and I remember Doug Flutie, it's one of these guys that for sure you sit back and you go, oh, I think he was a good player. And then the more and more you go back, you realize he wasn't as talented as it may have appeared on the surface. He was a starter in the league for a few years, but he was sort of in that desolate period for the Bills that they'd come off going 4 Super Bowls in a row. You bring Doug Flutie in, and it was one of those years of just mediocrity. He never truly became any franchise's face. He was a good backup and a good, role player from that standpoint. And I think you can find tons of quarterbacks throughout the years that meet that type of quota. But for him, he just never really panned out. That Hail Mary that I was talking about was against, I believe, Miami when he threw that for Boston College to walk it off. But ultimately, that's our first guess the player. Now to the present. This guy, we are recording this Friday, so the Thursday night game just happened, which I wanted to ask about him, is Lions running back David Montgomery, of where did he go to school. Your first big hint is it's a Big 12 school, if you haven't got it already, and it's a Big 12 school that I would say isn't in the prominent light at all. It's one of those schools that you see, but rarely do you ever hear about, especially competing for a Big 12 championship. If you haven't got it and you want a little extra time, pause, because the answer is it's Iowa State. Iowa State's a program, they produced a lot of good running backs throughout the years and a lot of good players, actually. The other big name, if you haven't thought of it by now in terms of big player Iowa State's produced that's doing exceptionally well in the NFL, was Mr. Irrelevant himself, Brock Purdy. Here's a guy that I would say that most NFL scouts completely dismiss. It's just sort of a random fact that he got picked with the last pick. one of the favorite things that I saw on Twitter this week was a Jets fan saying, he's waited his entire life for the Jets to draft a quarterback, and somehow the 49ers take a guy with the very last pick of the draft, and it works out, which sums up the Jets and also sums up why the 49ers are so good right now, just sort of luck and timing with it all. But it's a guy that you, in a school that you sit back and go, man, they've actually produced a lot more NFL talent than the talent that you see year in, year out come out of Iowa State in terms of just them being a good football team. But how we're going to handle, or how I'm going to handle it this week for the NFL, we'll go division by division. I'll pull out some things that I thought, just give overall feels, and then we'll talk about what's happening next week. I know the hottest thing in the NFL was probably Taylor Swift going to the to the Chiefs game. I'm not really going to talk about it that much. We'll talk about it a little bit when we get to the Chiefs. But for me, the hottest thing in the NFL right now is the Miami Dolphins, because they steamrolled the Broncos. You couldn't ask for a better game out of Miami. And I think for a lot of people, they sit back and they look at Tua and they go, this is the guy that we were hoping that we drafted. And their offensive line's a lot better. The weapons that they have, the fact that they put up 70 points on the Broncos and they didn't have Jalen Waddle, should be a big red flag to a lot of teams out there, that this is not just a, hey, if you can shut down one of these two guys, you're going to be good. The Broncos had the ability to just shut down Hill and not worry about Waddle, and they still put up 70 points, and they could have put up even more. They just didn't want to embarrass the Broncos at home. You sit back, they've really started to play the run a lot better after giving up so many yards to the Chargers in week 1. And the offense, Mike McDaniels, you can tell that another year he's more comfortable understanding what Tua can do and what the abilities of both sides are. And then you hear Tua saying, hey, I'm having fun. Hill's just, I can't understate enough or overstate enough how big of a trade getting Tyreek Hill was for this team, because you sit back and think about where Miami was with Waddle and what Tyreek Hill brings to this team. I've never personally seen a guy be able to get the edge like he does, literally in the middle of the field, and it's like everyone else is in slow motion as he runs over to the sideline and somehow gets around everyone to score, and he does it week in, week out. It's an unstoppable force for Miami. As long as Tua stays healthy, you sit back and look at the Dolphins, and for me right now, I have a hard time not making them the best team in the NFL, especially from the offensive side. Defensive side, yes, they still have work. You really want to see their defensive line become better. The surprising one for me was Chubb. Bradley Chubb, you sit back and think about him, you see what he did at Denver, now in Miami. It's not the force that you thought he was going to be. They do get Jalen Ramsey back here in a few weeks, coming off the IR. He'll be a boost to that defense in the secondary. I don't think he's going to be that type of shutdown corner that he once was, but he's better than most guys out in the league right now, so he'll be a huge help for the Dolphins. The only thing I'll bring up about the Dolphins is this. Last year, we sort of saw the exact same thing that's happening this year. Dolphins win their first 3 games. Then against Cincinnati, Tua gets hurt. They lose 3 games. After those 3 losses, they win 5 games, and then they lose 5 games, and they sort of stumble their way into the playoffs. They give a good run last year in the playoffs in that game, but they just didn't have the talent on the roster with Tua being out to really show what type of team they are. This year, and in particular right now, they're 3-0, and this week they're going and playing Buffalo. In the past, I saw a stat on Twitter that was like in the past 10 games, Miami's only won 1 of these, and that was last year. I think this is a huge moment for Miami. It's not going to define the season, but it will sort of set up their path to where if they can beat Buffalo and really take a hold of the division, when I look at the rest of the division, Buffalo's the only competition. In all reality. If they can beat Buffalo and take hold of the division, they're going to compete with the Chiefs for the AFC crown, because with Rodgers being gone from the Jets, Burrow looking awful with the Bengals, it's Miami and the Chiefs competing for that number 1 seed. Miami may not be that stadium that you sit back and go, man, I don't want to play there in the playoffs, but I can tell you, you don't want to go to Kansas City and play in the playoffs. So having that number one seed, it's not so much about it being a home game for Miami. It's not being a road game. So for this instance, I sit back and I look at this game and I say, hey, this is a key moment for you to take hold of the division and really start setting some distance between you and Kansas City. Kansas City's got a good test against the Jets this weekend, not in terms of the game overall. We'll get to it when I talk about the Jets, but just in terms of how the Jets defense is versus Kansas City's offense. I think it will be an entertaining game to watch, but we'll get to that here in a second. As I talked about Buffalo is one of these teams that I sit back. I was talking to one of my buddies who's a good Buffalo Bills fan. That first week, you really looked at the Buffalo Bills and you're like, I don't know if they're going to be a good team this year. And then they've been building. When you go back and watch week one, you really question how they lost to the Jets. And the only answer is the turnovers by Josh Allen. That's it. Because outside of that, it wasn't that the Jets just played so much better. It was that Josh Allen had a really bad game, was forcing balls, threw a few picks. They couldn't really get their run game going. And then you look at the Jets team, who at the moment didn't know that Aaron Rodgers was out, so I think that they're still playing with so much hype. They didn't know that he wasn't going to play for the rest of the year, so it was still meant a lot to go out and win that game. Not saying that it changed their outlook on the season going forward. I still think the Jets want to win. There was just so much momentum behind it that carried them forward, and then you had a punt return for a touchdown that ultimately won the game for the Jets. That you sit back and the Bills could easily be 3-0. My question for the Bills is can they keep building? And in these big games against big opponents, which next week is against Miami, can Josh Allen show up? The last time that Josh Allen showed up in a really, truly big game was against Kansas City in the AFC Championship game. Went back and forth. It was just the defense broke down. Go to last year against Cincinnati and you go, man, what happened to this offense? So that's what I'm looking for out of Buffalo this week is can they keep that momentum building? Are we going to see a Josh Allen who's conservative with the football, still taking those big shots down the field with Gabe Davis and Stephon Diggs, but you wanted to see him throw those deep balls when it's one-on-one, not three-on-one like you did against the Jets. That's where I'm sitting with Buffalo. Buffalo still, I think right now, in on the playoffs. So for sure, either win the division or be a wild card. I don't see Buffalo missing the playoffs. I think they're going to continue to run the table, especially in that division. It's just going to be between them and Miami. The next team's the Patriots. You sit back and look at the Patriots, and it's hard to judge this team based upon who they've played. They had to go play the Eagles. They've played the Jets, and then they played Miami. The only team they beat is the Jets. Eagles, NFC defending champ. Miami, they're 3-0, especially after the performance they did against the Broncos. You realize how good of a team they were. And then the Jets. The Jets, the biggest thing that you sit back and come away from that game is the Jets were in that game pretty much the whole time. The reason they lost is Zach Wilson. For the Patriots, you sit back and you go, the offense still isn't there. It's not from a lack of talent. Zeke Elliott is running the ball way better than I thought he would. I really didn't see him performing as well as he has. He's taking carries away from Stevenson just based upon how well he's running. And he's actually performing pretty well in the pass game, catching just in the flat and other things, making guys miss that I personally didn't see coming. I really thought this was going to be sort of the end of Zeke, and by week 4, Ramondre was going to take over the duties, but Zeke's been performing exceptionally well. It really falls on Mac Jones. And you question, is it pure Mac Jones or is it the offensive coordinator? Last year you had Mac Patricia, a defensive coordinator calling offensive plays, and this year you get Bill O'Brien. You look at the success that Bill O'Brien's had, and we talked about it during the preseason. Who knows who Bill O'Brien is? He had the same criticisms that are coming out of Bill Belichick right now, which is, hey, you don't have Tom Brady, you can't win, is you look at Bill O'Brien and you say the same thing about him being in New England. Last time he's in New England, he has Tom Brady. How'd it work out? Really well because of Tom Brady. Now you sit back and go, can you make those same type of successes work being back with the Patriots. And I sit back and I argue that Bill O'Brien's an overrated coach. I think that a lot of it's going to be taken out on Mac Jones. Personally, I can see Mac Jones being not picked up for his fifth-year option. I think the Patriots are going to look elsewhere for a quarterback. It's a tough position to be in because not too many times we don't look at the coordinators and say, hey, this is why a team's struggling. We look at the players on the field and say, this is why a team's struggling. I don't think that coaches win games, but I think coaches are more than capable of losing games for teams, and I think that's what's happening right now offensively for the Patriots. They showed with Kendrick Bourne they have some dominant wide receivers, and that's what I like from the Patriots, but ultimately we'll find out what type of team they are going forward. And then the final team in the division is the Jets. The Jets, you can sum it up with two words, which is Zach Wilson. He's terrible. You watch him run around, and it's clear that even after sitting Rodgers for the offseason, he's still the same Zach Wilson he was before. Maybe he runs a little bit better now, but in terms of bad decision making, he keeps throwing picks. He keeps costing this team games. And it is very surprising that the Jets haven't gone and get someone like Jacoby Brissett. They go out and get Trevor Siemian, who I think starts within a matter of either this coming game or next week. And it's also just because that start needs to happen because you're starting to see the effects on the rest of the team. You can tell the rest of the team does not like Zach Wilson as their quarterback, and it's because he's costing them games. If they know what they had in Aaron Rodgers, and now that they don't have it, you see sidelines getting into it. Carter was yelling at his running back coach. You see it with just other facets of their team, especially defensively, that they hold New England to less than 20 points, but the Jets can only score 10. That's frustrating for a defense. It's frustrating to hold a team that's offensively all right to very low points and your offense can't do anything. For the Jets, it's a year that there's no one that it's not a plug and play system. You can't just pick up a guy, throw him in a system and expect he's going to win us a championship. The Jets' Super Bowl and playoff hopes really died on MetLife Field when Aaron Rodgers went down. They're playing right now just for pride and trying to not get anyone seriously hurt for next year. It's a building year. They're going to find out who they have as a team and then come back next year with hopefully better players and a much improved offensive line. I think that's something that maybe gets passed over right now is the Jets line still isn't good. And I don't know how well Rodgers plays. I think he plays a lot better than Zach Wilson. And I mean, I would argue most people in the NFL could probably play better than Zach Wilson. But I don't know how much better of a season Rodgers has because of the struggles with the offensive line. You knew it was an issue going into the offseason. They weren't able to get a guy in the draft. You saw it on Hard Knocks where he's talking to the offensive line. The offensive line, ultimately, they miss a block, get him hurt on the fourth play of the game. You wonder if Rodgers could last the whole year behind this O-line, especially at his age. It's going to be a big thing for them in the offseason. I think the Jets maybe win like another 3 to 4 games, but outside of that, nothing special for the Jets. Next division we'll take a look at is the NFC or the AFC North. I'm taking a look at this division, and Baltimore, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh are all 2-1. For me, the best team out of those three is the Cleveland Browns. That defense is lights out. And for as much praise as Micah Parsons has been getting through the first three weeks of the season, it's been overshadowed how good Myles Garrett's playing right now. I don't think anyone wants to play Cleveland. And if Watson can continue to improve, they're going to be a threat in the AFC because of their defense. I would argue right now, Cleveland's defense is the best in the AFC and maybe one of the better ones in the NFL. I think the Eagles, the 49ers, and the Jets have a better defense, but Cleveland, it'd be hard to argue that they're not in the top 5 right now. If Myles Garrett keeps playing the way he's playing, they're going to win a lot of games. The other two teams that are 2-1 is Baltimore and Pittsburgh. Baltimore right now, their biggest issue is injuries. Can they get healthy? You lose a running back. I still think that Baltimore should go out and trade. They are my sleeper pick to go get Jonathan Taylor. I think that happens, especially, Kendrick Drake fumbled last week. Edwards is Edwards. It's not that he's a bad back. He's just not that home run threat that the Ravens really want. I really do think they go out and get Jonathan Taylor. They're my sleeper pick. We'll see what happens. They need that help offensively, but if they can't get healthy, ultimately the Ravens are going to fall by the wayside in the division. For Pittsburgh, you sit back and you look at them. Yes, they're 2-1, but it's not a 2-1 that you feel good about. The running game from Najee hasn't been there. There's times that you watch Jaylen Warren run and you go, man, he's a really good backup running back. He could probably get a few more touches during the game because of how effective he's running. But for Pickett, you sit back and look at his stats, 4 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Pickett isn't playing. I would argue if you were to take off their uniforms, close your eyes and hear the plays for both of these guys, and maybe just watch, maybe not close your eyes, but be able to watch these guys without the names or anything on them. The guy he honestly reminds me of is Mitch Trubisky, which I get is their backup right now, but you watch him play, it's not that he's a bad quarterback, he's just not a great quarterback. You can sort of start to see right now that there's a lot of, I would say, open-ended questions of, is this guy our franchise quarterback? By the end of year 2, going into year 3, it's only going to get harder for Pickett. And the reason I say this is every single game, coaches get more film on you. And every single game, they start to see your tendencies. And if you can't pick up on your own weaknesses and understand how to beat those things, you're going to continue to struggle in the NFL. And that's what you're seeing in Pickett right now. They have a whole year of film on him. He's going into a sophomore year. Most quarterbacks have a sophomore slump. Why? Because now the NFL has a whole year of film on you with your team, how they operate offensively. They're going to throw things at you that they know you struggle with to see if you can overcome them. Yes, they're 2-1, but it's not a pretty 2-1 for Pittsburgh. The season hinges on Pickett's play. I don't know how much better it's going to get. They do get Deontay Johnson back, hopefully in a week or two. That's going to help their offense. But overall for Pittsburgh, I just don't know how they're going to sit in the AFC with an offense that has a lot of questions about it. Which, that leaves one more team in the AFC North, which is the surprising one of the year, which is the Cincinnati Bengals. A lot's been made over Joe Burrow's calf, and I get from a throwing understanding that not being able to push off of your leg is going to change the strength of your throws, accuracy, all the different matrix that you could use. However, I don't really think that that's the root cause of Cincinnati's struggles. It's their offensive line yet again. When you look at from the time that they went to the Super Bowl versus the Rams throughout, what's been the Bengals' biggest problem? It's the line. I saw something online the other day that I thought was a great question. It really sums up their offensive line problems. If the Bengals could go back and redo the draft in which they drafted Jamar Chase, would they rather take Penei Sewell, the offensive lineman for the Lions? Because when you sit back and you actually think about that, yes, Jamar Chase is unreal at wide receiver, and it would be very hard to go out and get a guy like that. However, when you also sit back and you look at, we can't find an offensive lineman right now to protect Joe Burrow, it becomes more of a decision that you go, I think that we could probably find another wide receiver to make plays. We can't find an offensive lineman. I honestly think the Bengals would probably take Sewell just because of the struggles that they're finding right now getting an offensive lineman. But until they're able to fix their offensive line, the Bengals are going to continue to struggle. Burrow right now has only thrown 2 touchdown passes and 2 interceptions. Offensively, from a throwing standpoint, when you watch the Rams game, the biggest thing I saw was the lack of deep shots. You think about Burrow with Chase and Jefferson at LSU, and then even Burrow for the past few years, what's been a huge part of their offense is these huge scores going down the field. And until they bring that back, that it's going to haunt this offense. They're not testing teams deep right now. It's getting more people in the box. That's why Mixon's been struggling. They're going to have to test defenses deep. The issue with the deep routes is the offensive line isn't holding up long enough for them to be able to develop those routes. So until the offensive line plays better, Cincinnati's going to continue to struggle. I think it is a shock for everyone how bad they've been this year. The Rams are a good team. They just didn't look better than I thought they would against the Rams. They came out and got the win, but at no point would you sit back and go, that was a pretty game for the Bengals. It was a hard-fought victory. Can't take it away from them, but it wasn't one of those things that you walked away being completely thrilled with the win. Next division, we'll switch to the AFC South, which has sort of been we knew it was a bad division going in. The biggest thing for the Jacksonville Jaguars is you just didn't see them struggling like they did. They lose last week against the Texans, which was surprising, especially when you let a fullback return a kickoff for a touchdown. There's a lot of things going on in Jacksonville right now that you're sort of scratching your head going, what's happening with this team? Trevor Lawrence hasn't been exceptional. They have 3 wide receivers that are doing good, not great. In week 1, I think everyone got hype for Calvin Ridley, caught 2 touchdowns, had a great game. You think that, hey, this is going to be an offense that's going to light people up. The biggest thing that I'm seeing is the lack of a running game. ETN in 3 games has averaged 68 yards, and in those 3 games, the closest he's got to 100 is 88 yards in week 1. You sit back and look at Jacksonville and you realize that not having a running game, they're being able to push more defenders to the outside to cover what I would argue is a very good wide receiver room, if not an excellent wide receiver room. Kirk, Ingram, and Calvin Ridley are a huge threat. The reason they're not putting up more numbers is because they can't establish a running game. So the running game has to develop in Jacksonville for them to continue to win games going forward and compete in the division. I still don't think they're going to have a problem in the division. Their toughest test is Indianapolis. Indianapolis has surprised a lot of people, and I think the reason Indianapolis is doing so well is because of their offensive line. You still have Quentin Nelson, who's, I would argue, probably one of the top 5 offensive guards in all of pro football right now. And the fact that they went into Baltimore, I get Baltimore was down, and beat them with Minshew and no Anthony Richardson is a very good omen for the Colts going forward. They have talent on that team. It's just a matter of how they use it. For the Colts, their defense looks good. They have the pieces there to compete for the division. They're just going to have to get through Jacksonville. If they can beat Jacksonville and secure the rest of the division, we'll see how they go forward. The next team I think that's also on the upper coming is the Texans. You look at what C.J. Stroud's done this year, 4 touchdown passes, 0 interceptions. He has played very well. Dell's been a huge breakout in the wide receiver room, especially in fantasy. He's outproduced Debo in fantasy this year. He's been a very, very good wide receiver for them. You just want to see the Texans continue to build. And if they continue to build, do I think they win the division? Probably not. I'm not going to say that there's no chance they do. However, they have a very good ability to beat teams that they probably have no business beating, sort of like they did last week in Jacksonville. No one thought that they were going to win that game, but the Texans came out and showed why they could. The defense is starting to play a lot better. Will Anderson's playing better, had that block on the field goal. You're seeing things developing for the Texans that in a few years you're going to go, man, this is a good football team. The final team in the AFC South is the Titans, and they're awful. They're 1-2. They should be 0-3. If it wasn't for the Chargers doing Chargers things, they should have never won that game against the Chargers. You look at Tannehill right now, 1 touchdown, 3 interceptions. And you may sit back and go, well, they can bench Tannehill and go get who? Malik Willis or Will Levis? Like, neither one of those guys is going to win you games. And Derrick Henry, who has been their bell cow in the past, only has, through 3 games, 163 yards. Teams are loading up the box against Tennessee and saying, you're not going to run. We're finally good enough to prove it. Your offensive line is sort of in shambles, especially after Taylor Lewan left. Wide receivers, yes, they have D-Hop, but you see that D-Hop's the only answer. Like Burks, it's going to go down as probably the worst trade in all of NFL history for a wide receiver. The fact they gave up A.J. Brown for Treylon Burks, you can tell that was an immediate awful decision. There was everyone in the Titans organization should be fired for that decision, and they're going to feel that for decades to come because Burks isn't the answer. To be a number 2 guy, have D-Hop out there and not be producing, yes, you can sit back and throw it on Tannehill, but you're not getting separation as a wide receiver. You're not creating the opportunities to be able to get open. I sit back and look at the Titans, and I say it's going to be a long year. I put them in the bottom of the division going in, and I'm going to hold to it. I think they're one of the worst teams in football. They're not the worst because we'll get to the Bears here in a minute, but they're struggling. Talk about a team that wasn't struggling, which is our last division, the AFC West, which is Kansas City. You know, they have a great game against the Bears, which I would argue most teams are going to have a great week against the Bears. They go into New York this week. I think it's a good test for Kansas City just because of how good the Chiefs defense is. It's one of those games that it allows you to just find out, like, how are we doing offensively? It's a good test. Their defense should have zero problems shutting down the Jets' offense. I don't see the Jets winning that game at all. It's one of those games I would say is like a plus 10,000 odds for the Jets to win. I know it's not that. It's probably only like plus 550 or something. But Kansas City offensively, yes, there was so much made over Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift. Travis Kelce is that offense. Like when he's not there, that team is completely different. He is, I would argue right now, if he continues, probably the greatest tight end that we've ever got to see, which is saying something. You look back, I would argue that before him is Gronk. You look at what Gronk was able to do with New England and then at Tampa Bay. Gronk is still, for me, the number 1 tight end. If you said, hey, you can go build any team right now, who I'm picking with tight end, it would be a tie right now between Gronk and Kelce. Kelce is that guy that, from an offensive perspective, he is so lethal when catching the football, and he does it better than Gronk. Like, especially from a speed perspective, Gronk was just that big body dude and he played amazing, and he had sneaky speed, but you watch Kelce and you go, man, it's hard to not choose Kelce. If you had to pick one tight end to be on your team, it'd be Kelce. For the Chiefs, their division, it's going to be against the Chargers. I think that's their only competition. Herbert looks strong. They lose Mike Williams this past week, which is sort of this is not a shot at Mike Williams. I hope he gets healthy, but it was a matter of, you knew it was coming at some point. Allen and Williams always get hurt year in, year out. Now it's just a ticking time bomb for Allen to get hurt. They have Josh Palmer. They have Quentin Johnston. Quentin Johnston was my dark horse. He really hasn't shown anything of a dark horse except just sitting on the bench and not catching hardly anything. Palmer's come in, had really good weeks. The offense is there for the Chargers. Do I think they compete against the Chiefs? No. But I think the Chargers are a playoff team. If they can keep doing the things that they're doing. Herbert's had an amazing first 3 weeks. The fact that they're 1-2 is very shocking. They should have had a week 1 win, should have beat the Titans. And they sort of scraped by against the Vikings. They did typical Charger things, which is we play great and still somehow we lose. For the Chargers, if they can keep Herbert healthy, once they get Austin Eckler back, there's a lot of hope for this team going forward. But we'll see how that plays out. The Raiders, you sit back and you look at them and you go, God, this is a bad football team. Devontae wants out. Crosby wants out. Through 3 weeks, I think Hunter Renfrow has caught only like 3 passes. That offense is a mess. And the only thing that you can say about it is it's all Josh McDaniels' fault. There's no other blame to be put. There is too much talent there. And I get that Jimmy G hasn't played great, but it is a product of their system. Once Gruden left that building, the Raiders have only gone downhill. Yes, Gruden and Mayock drafted really poorly. in the drafts. You sit back and think about all the guys that they took and how none of them outside, I think, of Jacobs is with the team anymore. They're all gone. It has been a continual swing and a miss for the Raiders. Their season, they should, on paper, they're such a good team. It's so frustrating talking about them because I thought they were going to be a playoff team. I thought they should compete against the Chargers. And then you watch them against the Steelers and you just go, man, this team, they just suck. Like, they cannot find any type of consistency in their offense. Jacobs looks awful at running back, which I would too if you're hitting me 2 yards in the backfield every play. The line hasn't been there. Jimmy G's struggling. The team is in turmoil. We'll see if they're able to change it around. History tells us with Josh McDaniels that answer is going to be no, but we'll see. The only thing positive for the Raiders is you can't be any worse than the Denver Broncos. Because when I watched the Broncos-Miami game, and I thought I was watching Passion of the Christ. The only difference is that the Broncos didn't rise from the dead in 3 days. The Broncos are one of the worst teams in all of football, and they would be the worst team in all of football if not for the Chicago Bears. But we at least get that answered this weekend when the Broncos play the Bears. You sit back, and we talked about at the beginning of the year that here comes Sean Payton. This is the guy that's going to get Russell Wilson back to see the Seattle form that we do, and the offense is going to start scoring points. Last week against the Dolphins, they put up 20 points, and it needs to be brought up that 7 of those came from Marcus Mims taking a kickoff back for 6. This offense is inept. They cannot score more than 20 points. They have consistently struggled. And shout out real quick to whoever in the Seattle Seahawks organization recognized that they could be successful without Russell Wilson and made that trade. Talk about one of the biggest steals of a trade of all time, because I think everyone sat back and when Seattle traded him goes, man, what is Seattle doing? Like, yes, they got some great picks, but they're going to struggle next year. The Broncos are going to be back, and since that trade, the Broncos have been downhill. And it got probably the lowest that it's been in the past 2 years last week after getting 70 put up by the Dolphins. I don't know if the Broncos have a way forward, because you look at their roster, it's not for lack of talent. On paper, you sit back and go, the offense should be great. They have Jerry Jeudy. They have Cameron Sutton. They have Javonte Williams. They have P. Ryan. They have Russell Wilson. You would think that this team would be able to put it together. They can't. Russell looks lost. And then you go over and look at the sideline at Sean Payton, and you could tell my man wants to retire again. He does not want to be there. He is so frustrated with the bag he's been dealt. And you look at it and you go, it's on Russell Wilson ultimately, but whoever made that trade, I can't emphasize that enough. That's probably one of the best trades for Seattle in their history. They're going to have a hard time not looking back in 5 to 10 years saying the things that did for our team and how badly that went for the Broncos. As we transition over to the NFC, we'll start with the West Division as well. And I got to admit that I was wrong, because when I started off the season, same with Maul, the team that we thought would be the worst in all of pro football was the Arizona Cardinals. And I get that they're only 1-2. They're a good football team. They competed against Washington, should have beat Washington, were leading the Giants, and if not for giving up that huge comeback, would have beat the Giants. And then they go out and beat the Cowboys. From when you watch them on the field, they are competing. There is no, hey, we're laying down trying to tank for Caleb Williams, as I think everyone thought they would going into the year. And Dobbs right now is playing well enough that you sit back and go, I really don't want Kyler Murray out there. We know what Kyler Murray is capable of in terms of his good, but also his bad. Because I think it was 2 years ago, Arizona opened up 7-0 and they didn't win a game. Just kept losing. And it's because Murray struggles. Like, Murray is a freak athlete, and he's able to do things on the field that challenges the defense, and he's able to score. But now that there's no D-Hop and you're watching Dobbs, I sit back and go, give Dobbs the reins. He's played exceptionally well for the situation that you put him in, and he's only getting better. And especially after beating the Cowboys last week, you have to continue to give Dobbs his credit. But that whole division, it's not just the Cardinals that we're wrong on, it's that whole division. I really thought the Rams would be worse. Yes, they're 1-2. They've played really well. They come out, they beat Seattle week 1, which no one saw coming. Everyone thought that San Francisco would just run all over them. They only lost that game by 7. And then this week, they have a bad week. Stafford throws a few picks. They end up losing to Cincinnati. But you look at that team, it's clear that giving Sean McVay, Matt Stafford, helped that team so much. When Stafford's healthy and they're going to get Cooper Kupp, we'll see how that offense does. They're going to continue to put up a lot of points, in my opinion, especially once Cooper Kupp comes back. They are a good team. And if it wasn't for the 49ers being in that division, I think that you would say the Rams are the best team in the NFC West. That's just my hot take, mainly because I don't think Seattle has proven to me this year. You can tell there's something different about the Seattle team. It's weird to me that you get Smith and Jigba. You still have Metcalf. I get the injuries in other positions with the wide receiver room, but Seattle just hasn't been consistently playing like you would like them to play. Now, they're sitting at 2-1. They lose week 1 against the Rams, but now they've won 2 straight games. I like Seattle. I still have them as a playoff team. Me personally, I have 3 teams right now going to the playoffs out of the West in the NFC, which is San Francisco, Seattle, and the Rams. I think that each of those teams can easily make the playoffs, especially when you look at the other divisions in the NFC and see how far they're down. It wouldn't surprise me at all to see the Rams in the playoffs going into this year. And that leaves the final team in the NFC West of San Francisco. San Francisco is a really good football team, and it continues to amaze me how good Brock Purdy is. He's very good with the football, and you sit back and you go, hey, he's just a manager of the game. And I would say you're wrong on that based upon the talent that's on that roster. Even last year, you had Trey Lance. You have the quarterback from USC. His name's just escaping me right now. Sitting as a backup. He's Sam Darnold. Purdy has played better than most quarterbacks in the league. There are teams that if you sit back and you go, Denver, they take him. Chargers, they take him. Tennessee would take him. Pittsburgh would take him. The Jets would take him. I'd argue probably the Patriots would take Purdy. NFC, Carolina, I think they'd probably take Purdy. New Orleans would. Atlanta would. Tampa Bay would. Minnesota would. Chicago would. Maybe Green Bay. Maybe the Giants. Washington would. Maybe even the Cowboys because Dak can't stop throwing picks. Purdy is a great quarterback right now. He is doing amazing things for that team, and that team is loaded. They have a great defense. They have I would argue, the best running back in all of pro football right now in Christian McCaffrey. And when Brandon Ayuk is healthy, him and Debo and Kittle, it's an unstoppable force. They are so talented, and Kyle Shanahan knows how to use all those guys to light teams up. San Francisco, it's going to be the same test, sort of like the Bengals and the Chiefs going head-to-head every single year in the playoffs. It's going to be the Niners and the Eagles. Can they get past the Eagles? We're going to find out in a few weeks because they're going to play one another. But they're going to they are on a collision course to see one another again in the playoffs. We'll just find out which team's better. But right now, no one wants to play the 49ers. They are a very, very good football team on all fronts. Looking at the NFC South, another division that is surprising in terms of the teams of how they're doing. Atlanta is surprising. They've done very well, especially I think it's hard when you see a guy come out with the 4th pick. You knew that Bijan was going to be good, but I'd be lying if I told you that I saw him doing as well as he has, because he makes guys look stupid on the field. I saw this thing the other day online that said, is Bijan the best running back in all of pro football? The answer to that for me is no, because of Christian McCaffrey. Christian can run, he can throw, he can catch, he can do everything that you want out of back block. He is the ultimate versatile weapon. But you're seeing that with Bijan. and that's why Tyler Allgeier's fantasy points are so high and just his stats in general are high, is because they'll leave Allgeier as the running back in the backfield and they'll just split out Bijan and say, good luck putting a linebacker on him. And if you want to take a linebacker out of the game and bring a corner or a safety down to guard Bijan, we're just running it with Allgeier. And it's working for the Falcons. The Falcons have found, their offense. Their biggest thing is Ritter. Ritter hasn't played exceptionally well. They are 2-1. They should be. They played the Lions pretty well. They could easily be 3-0. We'll see as it continues. But when you look at their division, the division's down. We don't know. We know it's an AC shoulder joint for Carr. We'll see how long he's out for New Orleans. Tampa Bay's 2-1. They're a surprising team. Baker's played really well. Mike Evans going into a contract year is just putting up filthy numbers. Ultimately, he's going to go sign with someone in the offseason for who knows how much money. But between those three teams, you sort of sit back and go, man, they're all on an equal face. The only team in that division that you go, it's going to be a long year is the Panthers. Bryce Young, you don't know whether he's struggling, the offensive line's struggling. It didn't look good last week when Andy Dalton came in, and Andy Dalton looked really well, or played really well. Adam Thielen, I think, had 11 catches last week. You sit back and look at that Panthers team, and you go, they competed against Seattle. They looked really well. I don't know if when you put Bryce Young into that game, if you could say the same thing. Bryce Young looks lost. There's been time, I've watched a few of the games for the Panthers, and you see Bryce Young hit guys and drop them. Guys aren't getting open. He's running for his life. You can tell he's still uncomfortable in the pocket and leaves a little bit early sometimes. I don't know how good the Panthers are going to be. And the issue is that with them trading for that pick, they gave it to the Bears. They're not going to have a awesome number one overall pick or in the top 5 this year because they gave it to the Bears. If they continue to struggle like I think they will, ultimately they're going to have to go into free agency to try to find some guys to help that team, especially in the position of wide receiver. The Panthers, it's just going to be a long year ahead of them just because you have a rookie quarterback trying to learn. Andy Dalton is going to be able to come in and play and win games, but I think they're really committed to finding out who Bryce Young is. He's going to play a lot of games for him. New Orleans, with Carr going down, they should have beat Green Bay. Let's get that out of the way. When Carr went down, it changed the momentum of the game. Winston came in, was struggling, which who wouldn't? Any guy, I get he's a professional football player, but here's a guy who has not been seeing first-team reps. He's not been throwing every single play with his wide receivers. The timing, all these different type of things are not there for him. For you to expect him to just come into a game and just win it for you, it's a tough thing. It's the NFL. It's tough to expect that from a player. Now that he's gotten a week for New Orleans, Winston has shown moments that you go, he can be a very good quarterback. And on the opposite end, he's also shown moments where it's like, man, he just threw 4 picks in the first half. You have to chill. Those are the type of things that you're going to look from the Saints team of, can Winston lead them to victory? If not, they're going to go to Taysom Hill. That's what's going to happen. They have a lot of talent offensively, especially in the wide receiver. Alvin Kamara's coming back. I think that they lean on him with Carr being injured. If Kamara can show the type of player that he was 2 years ago, not last year, but when you think about how good he's been, if they can get that type of effort out of him, the Saints will do well in that division. The only team they're going to compete against is the Buccaneers. The Bucs, for me, Baker Mayfield has showed that, hey, maybe the Browns shouldn't have let him go. It was just the product of the Browns didn't have talent around him, and now that he has a lot of talent around him, he's looking good. Yes, he didn't play exceptionally well against the Eagles. Outside of Patrick Mahomes, show me someone who has. It's difficult to play against a defense like the Eagles and look really good. Mayfield's played well. Mike Evans has played well. They have talent on that team. And they will compete in that division. How much they compete outside of the division, who knows? But ultimately, Tampa Bay, they're looking good. You can't say anything other than that. The NFC North, this is where you find the worst team in all of pro football, which is the Chicago Bears. I don't even know where to begin. with the Bears. To say that they've been bad is one thing. Last night, the Lions beat the Packers. We'll get into the Lions here in a second, but this was the stat that I saw, and I wanted to bring it up. Through 4 games, David Montgomery, and he's missed a game, so he really has only played 3 games. David Montgomery has scored 5 touchdowns. In 3 games for the Chicago Bears, they have scored a total offensively 5 touchdowns. One player on the Lions has scored the same amount as an entire team has for the Bears. That is a huge problem with the Bears. And when you watch them, it's a mess all over. The offensive line's terrible. Fields is playing bad. You watch him against just any type of defense, he has guys that are open. He's not seeing them. He literally looks like Sam Darnold on that Monday night game, like seeing ghosts. You don't know what he's doing. You don't know what's going on with that organization. That organization has been a complete dumpster fire since 1985, and especially at the quarterback position. I sit back and you think about Jim McMahon, the best quarterback, one could argue, for the Bears because of the Super Bowl victory in that year. I think a lot of Bears fans would probably say he's the best quarterback they've had. That's saying something, because when I look back at all the teams in the NFL and you go, hey, any guy that ever played for you, if you got to pick your franchise quarterback, I don't know if there is another team in the NFL that, looking at any guy in their past who's ever played quarterback for them, would choose Jim McMahon to be their leader. And that sort of sums up the Bears. I know that he's not the quarterback now, but Fields is worse right now than McMahon was. You look at his first few years, he's only won 5 games. I think he's 5-26 or 27 as a starter in terms of wins, losses. For touchdowns, interceptions, he's 27 and 25 for TDs to picks. He is not playing well, and so much of that is overlooked because of his athleticism when running the football. But this year, teams are just saying you're not going to run on us. Like, you're going to have to beat us throwing. It's sort of like the Titans with Henry. Is teams just load the box and say, you're not going to run. You're going to have to prove that you can beat us as a quarterback. And right now for the Bears, they can't do it. They cannot move the field down offensively. I think through 3 quarters of the Chiefs game, Justin Fields only had like 62 yards throwing. Their offense is completely inept for everyone. And what I talk about, such a letdown for Bears fans. Preseason, DJ Moore catches 2 passes, both go for touchdowns. And this year, as Maul told me the other day, it's DJ, not more, but DJ less. Like, you have not seen this guy at all. The entire team is missing. And ultimately, it will be a complete teardown top to bottom. But this has happened every single year. And you sort of go back and you wonder, if the Bears had never fired Lovie Smith, who when he got fired, I believe was like 10-3. He was not doing bad as a head coach. Here is a guy that I remember when Lovie Smith took over the Bears organization, his first thing that he said, what was he going to do? We're going to beat the Packers. Like, he had such high goals for that team. Took him to a Super Bowl. With Rex Grossman as a quarterback. It almost won. They should have won. Their defense that year was exceptional, if not for quarterback play. And that's been the same mantra with the Bears ever since. You look at that team, they get rid of Rex. They're trying to find a quarterback. They get rid of him. Fields. You have Cutler. You have Kyle Orton. You have so many different guys that come through that organization that you just go, man, they're not working out. And it's because you can't build behind them. When a team is constantly trying to find new skill positions, what do they miss out on? They miss the guys that the fans don't buy their jerseys. It's offensive linemen. These are the guys that make a football team. When you look at the best football teams in pro football right now, think about it. 3 teams that are 3-0. The Eagles, the Niners, and the Dolphins. What do all 3 have in common? Good offensive lines. When you look at the worst teams in football right now, Carolina, Minnesota, Chicago, Denver, what's happening? Quarterbacks are getting tossed around. Now, yes, Denver has a terrible quarterback in Russell Wilson. Carolina, brand new rookie. Minnesota, we'll get to them here in a second. But Chicago, top to bottom, you look at that team, terrible in all assets, like, or aspects. They're just not winning the games that you thought they would, or even competing in those games. This week will decide if they're the worst team in all of pro football against the Broncos. I think a lot of people have hoped the Bears will finally show up because the Dolphins put up 70 points against the Broncos. But if the Bears come out and look as inept as they have for the first 3 weeks against the Broncos, just go ahead and pack it up and don't watch the Bears again this season if you're a Bears fan, because it will only get worse from here if they can't beat the Broncos. The other 0-3 team, which is surprising, is Minnesota. I saw this stat and it really cracks it up. Kirk Cousins this year is on pace for this. He's on pace for 6,000 yards passing, 50 touchdown passes, and 0 wins. So you sit back and you hear those stats, and you're like, oh, this is really good. Then you hear the 0 wins, and you go, oh, this is really bad. The team is competing, but defensively they're struggling. And the biggest surprise for Minnesota, which is I think why you're seeing more of a struggle for them right now, is the running game. I think a lot of people thought Madison would be the guy. You know, they let go of Dalvin Cook. There was a faith in him. They go out and they now sign Cam Akers. We'll see what type of player Cam Akers is. Every single year people draft him high on fantasy, and every single year the Rams didn't play him, which really makes you question what's wrong with Cam Akers, because of the fact that under Sean McVay, you think that if they had a guy that showed some type of talent, that McVay would find a way to use him, but they're not using him right now. We'll find out going forward how the Vikings play this out, but no team has ever made the Super Bowl after starting the season 0-3, ever. Only 3 teams have ever gone 0-2 and then went to a Super Bowl and won, which is the 93 Dallas Cowboys against Buffalo, the 2001 New England Patriots against the Rams, and then finally was the 07 Giants against the undefeated Patriots. So you look at Minnesota's outlook, they have a lot of issues right now offensively. The defensive secondary is still not good. The Vikings are in a bad position, and if they can't figure it out, will they get past Chicago? Yes. I don't think Green Bay is as good as everyone thinks they are. It's still going to be a struggle with Green Bay. The Lions right now are the kings of the division, and we saw that last night. And it was I was happy to see what I saw from the Vikings last night, and here's what I mean by that. You see them drive down at the end of half and run a few times, and you're sort of like, man, they're not really being aggressive going into the end zone. I hope this doesn't bite them. Loving them come out, drive it down the field, get a 2-point conversion. The Lions stumble. The Packers get the ball. You're like, and then they make it, it was a 16-point game. They go for 2 again to cut it down. You're like, hey, the Packers are going to be back in this. The Lions are going to do Lions things. That's what I was sitting there thinking last night is I'm going to watch the Lions blow this lead. These are the same Lions that we've always known for the past few decades, but then they surprised me. When it came time for the Lions to decide, do we want to win this football game or do we not? The Lions made the plays they needed to win the game. And it's the best way I can say it is sort of the whole Dan Campbell mantra. It's just this gritty team. They showed that grit last night in Lambeau. It's a difficult place to play. They came out and won the game. On the opposite side of the field is Green Bay, who I think a lot of teams thought were really good, especially after week 1 against the Bears. And my argument is now you're starting to see how bad the Bears are, and you're starting to question how good Green Bay is. Yes, they were beating the Saints, they beat the Saints, but they were getting blown out in NFL standards by 17 points. It's a big comeback. They were struggling. The Packers found a way to win that game, but you sort of look at the Packers and you go, who is this team? Love has shown games in times where he throws great touchdown passes and they have the ability to stretch field, but you also see a guy that you would not think going into his 4th year, I get he hasn't got to see a lot of live action. He's throwing some picks, and they're not looking as good as people thought this team was going through week 1. So for me right now, the division is the Lions. And here's a great stat on the Lions that I saw. I love this. So in the regular season, since week 9 of last year, here's the top teams performing. Since week 9 in the regular season of last year, San Francisco is 12-0. The Chiefs are 11-2. The Bengals are 9-2. The Eagles are 10-3. And the Detroit Lions are 11-3 in the regular season since week 9 of last year. They are one of the top 5 teams right now in all of football. Their defense is playing a lot better. You know, what a great pick by them at middle linebacker. A lot of teams are frustrated right now by Jahmyr Gibbs not getting the football as they would expect him to based upon the high draft position. But it's hard to argue against David Montgomery's numbers that he's putting up. He's playing very well. I think as the season goes on, they're going to find ways to integrate Jahmyr Gibbs, sort of like the Falcons are with Algier getting the ball in the backfield and them splitting off Gibbs and being able to use him in those different type of facets. They have a very good football team. The biggest thing for them is Jared Goff is playing great football right now. It was something to throw a pick to start off the drive in Green Bay and then have the game that he did from that moment forward. Found a way to win, came out, had a tremendous game after throwing that interceptions. The Lions are for real. They are a team to be reckoned with. We saw it in Kansas City. I get that teams were saying, well, they didn't have Chris Jones. They didn't have Travis Kelce. That's not a problem for the Lions because the only time that they're going to see Kansas City is in a Super Bowl. From here on out. That's the only time they're going to see them again. So they can settle that debate on that stage, which if you put the Lions in the Super Bowl after never being there, they're going to find a way to try to win that game. Guarantee you that. So it leaves our last division, which is the NFC East. And it is I think, an overrated division in some sense. I love the Eagles' defense. The Eagles' defense has looked every bit the part. Jalen Carter has shown through 3 weeks of football he should have been the number 1 overall pick. He's played lights out. The fact that he fell to the Eagles is criminal. That's it. It is criminal. There's no reason the Eagles should have gotten that good of a player. The Eagles are 3-0. And the reason I don't want to say that they're overrated. My biggest thing with the Eagles right now is you look at that team and offensively, you can tell they're just out of whack. And it really makes me wonder about the new offensive coordinator. Last year, they could not miss. With Hurts, play calling, everything, it just lined up flawlessly. This year, you can tell that there's, I don't want to say a lack of chemistry. There is just some type of friction in terms of cohesiveness with this offense that you're not seeing. I think that they have some great running backs. Personally, that's where my logic is with the Eagles, is I think that they have too many running backs. They're trying to give all these guys different touches, and these guys aren't able to just consistently get the ball. Personally, DeAndre Swift's the number 1 running back. If they would just commit to him and, hey, you're our lead back, we'll substitute these guys in as necessary, but you're going to get the majority of reps, I think it would help the Eagles just in their offense be a little bit more stable. But overall, they're my favorite still in the NFC. Until someone proves that they can compete with the Eagles week in, week out, especially on that defense, they're just going to be tough to stop. The overratedness comes, and I don't like the Cowboys. Let me just lay this out for you. Who have the Cowboys beat? You sit back and you go, oh, well, they killed the Giants on week 1. Okay. Who are the Giants? I don't know. Are the Giants the same Giants that we saw against Dallas? Are they the ones that we saw lose for pretty much 3 quarters against the Arizona Cardinals and then found a way to come back? They competed against San Francisco but didn't look great. You don't look at the Giants and go, hey, this is a great football team. Okay, so that was week 1 for Dallas. Who did Dallas beat week 2? They beat an Aaron Rodgers-less Jets. Like, Zach Wilson looked terrible. Shocker. He looked terrible all last year. That's why they went out and got Rodgers. Yet again, the Cowboys are, they're this great team. They've looked amazing. Like, think about the offensive lines that Michael Parsons went against. He went against the Giants and the Jets, both of which are at the bottom of the league in terms of offensive lines. The Cowboys have these 2 great games, and they're going to murder the Cardinals. I think that they were 13-point favorites over the Cardinals. So what happens? The Cardinals win, and they didn't just win. They looked the part. They ran it down Dallas's throat. They made big plays. The defense wasn't there. Dak Prescott showed Dak Prescott things by throwing picks when you go, even a blind man could have hit that tight end as open as he was over the middle of the field as they're driving down. There were times that you sit back and look at the Cowboys and you realize that they are no better of a team than we thought they were at the beginning of the year. They are completely overhyped in my mind right now. I think New England upsets them, and here's why this going week. That's my team to pick. Bill Belichick knows how to coach defense. He will get a good defense out there, and if we know anything to be true about Dak Prescott, he's going to throw a few picks. He is going to find ways to make it difficult for his team to pull ahead. We'll find out how good that defense is. They're going against a Patriots team that I would argue is just a step above the past 3 teams that they played, but not by a lot. They're better than the Giants. They're better than the Jets. They're better maybe than the Cardinals' offensive line. The Patriots have more talent. We'll find out what type of team it is going forward. But I think the Patriots pull out that matchup because I like the Patriots defense more than I like Dallas's offense. Dallas to me is overrated, and I think they're going to prove that throughout the year. I don't think that they're going to be a bottom-dwelling team. I just don't think that people are putting them up there as, hey, this is Dallas's year. They're going to compete in the NFC and in the AFC for a Super Bowl. I don't see that. They haven't proven that through 3 weeks of football against 3 teams that aren't great to say that Dallas is one of the best teams. Outside of those, the Cowboys, you got the team that I was just talking about, the Giants. The Giants' offensive line, I would argue some colleges wouldn't want. Both of their offensive tackles, it's surprising. I am an Alabama fan. Evan Neal, I thought, would play a lot better, but you watch him, and man, there were just some struggles on that offensive line, especially in the tackle position. They are getting beat consistently up front. And then the thing that really is surprising is as many shots as Daniel Jones takes, then they'll just be like, okay, run it as a QB. If he's not already taking enough shots, let's get him a few more to pick up these 5 yards. The Giants without Saquon are not a great football team. Saquon makes them so much better. Offensively, outside of that, you really look at their wide receivers and you go, what's happening? Like, Waller's not really being consistent, especially when catching the football. You go out and get Jalen Hylett, and I think he's only had like 1 major catch in 3 weeks. He's not the guy that the Giants were really hoping that they had stole when they drafted him. And outside of those guys, offensively, it's Saquon and it's Daniel Jones. I can't even name another wide receiver on their team right now just because they haven't performed. Defensively, yeah, they look ugly. Like the Giants, they have Kevin Thibodeau. Thibodeau hasn't played amazing. You look at their secondary is not good. The Giants are just not a good football team this year. And it's time that people recognize that. I think the Giants finished dead last in the division, which is surprising because I don't like the Reds or the Commanders either. You look at Sam Howell, he's had a couple good games, but overall you do look back and you go, Sam Howell's not the answer for Washington. Washington's just had so many different type of struggles that you look at and you go, I don't know who this team is. Like, they show good things against the Cardinals, but they also show bad things. The same thing against the Broncos. They've struggled against teams that you really would think that Washington would have a better chance of putting away, but Washington's struggling. And until they can change that, it's going to be a struggle for them going forward. It's going to come down to, can this team offensively be able to protect Sam Howell? They have Dotson, they have Scary Terry, they have Brian Robinson. They have guys that you would like to see perform better to help him out. But for me, the Commanders, where their issues still lie, I look on the opposite side of the football. Chase Young has that magical rookie season, and since that point, Chase Young has looked like a backup defensive end. He has not been someone that you go, hey, this is the reason we spent that draft pick on this guy as high as we did. I don't think that anyone would trade even a second or third round pick for Chase Young right now. He has not looked the part. And then especially when you look at that defensive line on paper, you say that they should be the best defensive line in all of pro football right now, but they're not. Like they are, it's difficult to put it all on the defensive line. They do a pretty good job against the run. The issue is that secondary is terrible. Like they can't guard anybody. Guys get open within 5 yards of coming off the line of scrimmage. I don't care what defensive line you have out there, unless they're hitting him within about 3 seconds, or less of the snap, you're going to lose games because guys are getting open. The Commanders and the Giants are going to struggle with the bottom of the division. Do I think the Cowboys make the playoffs? Yes, because this is what the Cowboys do every single year, is they come out and they have this hope. They give their fans hope, and they're like, this is our year. People are getting tattoos. People are singing the Cowboys praise. They get into the playoffs, and for the past 2 years, they've met the Niners. I think they could easily meet them again, and then it immediately ends, and now we go into the offseason of the Cowboys aren't back. We're automatically limited for the playoffs. Give it about 6 months, and now we're right back in Super Bowl contention. They do this every single year. But to end it, I will talk about who I think the playoff teams are as we sit right now. For me, out of the NFC East, I've got the Eagles and the Cowboys. NFC North, I just have Detroit. NFC South, right now, I still have Tampa Bay. And then out of the NFC West, I got 3, which is San Francisco, Seattle, and the Rams. Those are the teams right now that I think are the 7 best teams out of the NFC. You could make an argument out of the South for Atlanta or New Orleans, and out of the North, maybe Green Bay, but that's a big maybe based upon their play the past few weeks. Out of the AFC East, I think that you look at them and you go Miami for sure and Buffalo. The Patriots, Jets aren't going to make it. Out of the North, I'd argue it's Baltimore and Cleveland, and really it's Cleveland. I think Baltimore can sneak in as long as they can beat Cincinnati and sort of keep them at bay. But Cleveland's the real deal. I think they are the front runner right now to win the division. Burrow has struggled against the Browns. That's a historic thing. It's not just this year. It's been since he started playing. I think he's only 1 for 5 against the Browns. The Browns, in my opinion, are the favorite to win that division. Out of the South, it's really between Jacksonville and Indy. Right now, I'm giving the nod to Jacksonville. I think that they're just more talented up front. Yes, you have a rookie quarterback in Anthony Richardson. Minshew showed some good things against the Ravens, but you don't know how they're going to perform throughout the year. Right now, I'd still put my money with Jacksonville. And then out of the West, I think it's Kansas City and the Chargers. So you look at those 2 teams, those are the only 2 teams that could possibly compete at the division. Kansas City's still probably the favorite in the AFC. So it gives you Kansas City, the Chargers, Jacksonville, the Browns, the Ravens, the Bills, and the Dolphins. Those are my 7 best teams. I'll do the same thing like I did with the NFC. You could make maybe an argument for Pittsburgh to compete against Baltimore, and you could make the argument for Indy to compete against Jacksonville. But outside of those teams, I really don't see anybody else throughout the year performing well enough based upon what we've seen through 3 weeks to make a statement to say that they're going to be a playoff team going forward. But ultimately, we'll see. So that does wrap up our NFL episode. Sorry that it's not both of us. We're going to try this out and see how it works. If you like it, please comment. If not, send us an email, write it on the YouTube post. You can always reach out to us through our website, footballtalksquadron.com, and let us know ways to improve. But we appreciate that you joined in today for the NFL recap. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.